Sing Mozart and I'll marry you. The words cut through the obsidian room like a blade. Only minutes earlier, the room had been anything but silent. Elena Vance stood near the center table, her hands clasped so tightly in front of her apron that her knuckles had gone white. She was shaking Rune Ray, the kind of trembling that came from fear rather than cold, and she could feel it in her knees, her wrists, the thin line of her throat. She had already apologized once, then twice, then again, her voice breaking each time. "I'm so sorry, Miss Thorne," Elena said, her head bowed, eyes lowered the way she had learned to do. "I was bumped from behind. It was an accident. Please don't have me fired." Isabella Thorne laughed, not loudly, not theatrically. It was worse than that, a thin, contemptuous sound, like someone flicking ash from a cigarette. "An accident?" Isabella repeated, standing up slowly. Her red silk dress, custom couture, imported, irreplaceable, was stained dark with wine across the bodice. She looked Elena up and down, taking in the cheap black uniform, the scuffed shoes, the frayed collar. "Girls like you always have accidents." Elena's mouth opened, then closed. Her heart slammed painfully against her ribs. Around them, heads turned. Eyes watched. Some curious, some amused. "Do you have any idea?" Isabella continued, her voice rising just enough to carry. "How much this dress costs? It's more than you make in a year. Possibly 2. "I'll pay for it," Elena said, the words tumbling out in desperation. "I'll work extra shifts. That did it." Laughter rippled across the table. A man in a tailored suit snorted into his glass. Another leaned toward his companion and whispered something that made her smile behind her hand. "Pay for it?" Someone scoffed. With what talent? Elena felt the heat rush to her face. She was acutely aware of how small she looked among them, how alone. The obsidian room was a cathedral to wealth chandeliers, dripping light like frozen tears. Walls lined with polished stone. The air perfumed with truffle oil and entitlement. She had learned to be invisible here. Tonight, she was painfully seen. "Marcus!" Isabella snapped, summoning the floor manager without even turning her head. "I want her gone. Immediately, and I don't want to see her anywhere in Manhattan again." Marcus appeared, sweating, nodding too quickly. "Of course. Miss Thorne. Elena, you'll need to, please," Elena whispered. She surprised herself by sinking slightly at the knees, not kneeling, but close enough to humiliation that her pride screamed in protest. "I need this job. I take care of my family." "Please don't." Someone laughed again. Julian Blackwood hadn't said a word yet. He sat back in his chair, watching the scene with distant interest, as if it were a mildly entertaining play running too long. The city's most eligible billionaire, 32, devastatingly composed. He swirled his wine, eyes half-lidded. "Does she even have any real skills?" a man at the table asked lightly. "Besides spilling things?" Another voice chimed in, cruel and playful. "Careful, she might cry on your shoes." Then it happened. As Elena shifted her weight, trying to steady herself, a foot slid out quick, subtle, deliberate, and caught her ankle. She gasped as her balance vanished. The bottle in her hand tilted, wine splashing across the tablecloth, droplets scattering like blood. She barely caught herself on the edge of the table, heart racing, breath gone. Laughter exploded, real laughter now. Unchecked, Isabella smiled. Elena stood frozen, every nerve on fire. "Don't cry. Don't cry. Don't give them that." Julian finally stood. "Enough," he said mildly, though there was no real heat in the word. He stepped closer, his presence commanding attention the way gravity commands matter. He glanced at Isabella, then at Elena, and something like boredom crossed his face. "You want me to forgive her clumsiness?" he asked, voice carrying. "Fine." He turned toward the small stage where the string quartet had just finished playing. On the music stand lay a forgotten sheet of music. Julian plucked it up, unfolding it with a careless flick of his wrist. "You want to keep your job?" he said to Elena. "Sing this Mozart aria perfectly, and I'll marry you." The room erupted. Cruel laughter, sharp laughter. the laughter of people who knew exactly who held power and enjoyed watching it flex. Julian lifted the page, displaying it like a challenge. Der Holle Rasch. The Queen of the Night. The Graveyard of Sopranos. Elena stared at the notes. They stared back. Something inside her shifted. Does the orchestra know the key? She asked. The laughter faltered. Just a little. Julian blinked. What? D minor, Elena said, lifting her chin for the first time that night. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. Do they know it? A ripple of confusion passed through the room. Julian studied her now. Really studied her. The trembling had stopped. Her shoulders were straight. Her eyes dark. Steady held his. They're Philharmonic backups, he said slowly. They know it. Elena nodded once. Good. She walked to the stage. Each step felt unreal, like walking out of her own body and into a life she had sworn never to touch again. The pianist looked at her with concern. You don't have to do this, he murmured. D minor, she replied. Fast tempo. Don't wait for me. The first chord struck. Elena closed her eyes and sang. The sound that burst from her throat was not tentative. It was not hopeful. It was absolute. A blade of sound that sliced through the obsidian room and pinned every soul in place. Julian's glass froze halfway to his mouth. Isabella's smile died. Elena soared through the aria with terrifying precision. Her voice a weapon forged from years of silence, loss, and swallowed rage. When the final note fell, the room was dead quiet. Then Julian began to clap, slowly, deliberately. Elena turned and ran, and Julian Blackwood, for the first time in years, felt something wake up inside his chest. If this moment gave you chills, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. You never know who else nearby is watching too. Elena didn't stop running until her lungs burned. She pushed through the swinging doors of the kitchen, past the stunned sous chefs and gawking dishwashers, down the narrow back corridor lined with crates of produce and racks of wine glasses. The cool air of the alley hit her face like a slap. She leaned against the brick wall and pressed a trembling hand to her chest. She had sung, not quietly, not halfway. She had opened her mouth and let 3 years of silence erupt like thunder in a room full of the most powerful people in the city. And now what? Her knees buckled. She slid to the ground, breathing hard, adrenaline crashing through her like a storm. Her fingers were still curled as if clinging to invisible notes. Her ears rang not from the music, but from the memory of Julian's slow, deliberate applause. Not mocking, not amused, something else. Appreciative, terrifying. She buried her face in her hands. What had she done? Elena had spent the last 3 years disappearing, scrubbing floors, waiting tables, sleeping in hospital chairs beside her younger brother. She had buried the name Vankova so deep that even she forgot how it sounded. Now it was all coming back. The cold brick behind her did little to cool the fire in her veins. She tried to steady her breath, remember why she had stopped singing in the first place, but all she could hear was that first note. Sharp, unapologetic, alive. A voice startled her. Elena, Marcus, the floor manager, stormed out the back door. What the hell was that? I'm sorry, she said automatically, her eyes still wet. You embarrassed the entire restaurant, he snapped, adjusting his sweating collar. Do you even realize what kind of guests were out there? I do, she said, pulling herself to her feet. And one of them humiliated me in front of all the others. Well, maybe you shouldn't have dumped a bottle of Pinot Noir on a billionaire's fiancé. I didn't, she stopped. What was the point? He wouldn't believe her. No one had. You're done here, he continued, pointing toward the alleyway like it was exile. And don't bother putting me down as a reference. You'll be lucky to find work at a diner in Queens. Elena didn't argue. She didn't plead this time. She simply turned and walked away, her shoes echoing on the pavement. The subway ride back to Hell's Kitchen was a blur. She kept her head low, arms wrapped tight around herself. The late-night train was mostly empty, just a few night shift workers and a man sleeping under his coat. She stared out the window as the dark tunnels rushed by, trying not to think about the dozens of eyes that had watched her, judged her, measured her, and then applauded. She climbed the 4 flights of stairs to her apartment, pausing outside the battered blue door. Apartment 4B. A place that smelled like old carpet and hope. Inside, The soft beeping of medical equipment hummed through the dim living room. She closed the door quietly and tiptoed toward the bedroom. "Elena?" A weak voice called. She peeked in. Leo lay in bed, pale and thin, his arm taped to a line feeding into the dialysis machine. "Hey," she whispered. "You're home early." She crossed the room and sat beside him, brushing his damp curls off his forehead. "Yeah, I quit." His eyes widened. "What happened?" "I made a scene." He looked at her with the kind of understanding only someone who has also lived through humiliation can offer. "Wanna talk about it?" "Not yet," she said softly. "But soon." He nodded. "Did they fire you because of the song?" She froze. "What do you mean?" "You were singing when you came in, under your breath. You do that sometimes when you're not thinking." She laughed quietly, covering her face. "God, I didn't realize." He smiled, weak but sincere. "I like it when you sing." A lump rose in her throat. She squeezed his hand gently. "Get some sleep, okay? I'll figure out what's next." "Ozzy." She left the room and curled up on the couch, pulling a thin blanket over her shoulders. Her apron still smelled like wine and embarrassment. She stared at the ceiling until her eyes refused to stay open. By morning, the video had gone viral. It wasn't supposed to be filmed, but someone always had a phone, a waitress, a billionaire, a dare, a voice. It was all too good. A headline wrapped in fantasy and scandal. "Sing Mozart and I'll marry you," the caption read. The clip ended with the high F that made even trained sopranos flinch. But this girl? This waitress? She owned it. Thousands of comments, millions of views, and one man in a penthouse with a glass of scotch in hand, watching the video for the 7th time. Julian Blackwood sat at his sleek glass desk, his laptop open beside a manila folder stamped with the seal of a private investigative firm. "She's not who she pretended to be," Arthur said, placing another sheet in front of him. Julian scanned it. Elena Vankova, age 24, former Juilliard prodigy. Scandal, rumors, disappearance. She's been hiding in plain sight. Arthur nodded. 3 years, changed her last name to Vance. Works 2 jobs, lives with her brother, Leo. He's in end-stage renal failure. Julian leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable. "And the scandal?" "Fabricated," Arthur said. "Traced the rumors back to a PR firm, owned by the Thorne family." With yes, Julian's fingers tightened around the edge of the desk. "Isabella," he said coldly. "She buried her." Julian stood, turning to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. He didn't speak for a long time. Then, finally, he said, "Find out where she lives." Arthur blinked. "Now?" Julian didn't turn around. "Yes, now." A few hours later, in a worn-out apartment in Hell's Kitchen, someone knocked on Elena's door. A heavy knock. Not the landlord. Not a neighbor. She peeked through the peephole. "Julian Blackwood." She froze. He knocked again, slower this time. "Elena," he said calmly through the door. "We need to talk." She didn't move. Didn't breathe. "Elena, if you don't open this door, I'll have my head of security pick the lock." Her fingers hovered over the deadbolt. He waited. "Elena," he said again, his voice lower now. "You sang last night, but now it's my turn." She unlocked the door. Elena opened the door no more than 3 inches, just enough for the chain to stretch taut. The hallway beyond smelled like dust and boiled rice. Julian Blackwood stood there in the same tuxedo from the night before, though the bow tie was gone and his collar undone. His dark hair looked like he had run a hand through it too many times. Even out of place, he radiated presence. A man born into wealth, used to control, and utterly unbothered by locked doors. He didn't blink at the sight of the chain. He simply looked at her, studying the dark circles under her eyes, the dried streaks of exhaustion on her cheeks, the frayed hem of the apron still clinging to her waist. "You didn't run far enough," he said quietly. "You shouldn't be here," she replied, her voice low, firm. "Maybe," he said. "But I am." She exhaled through her nose, debating. The chain stayed on. "I don't have anything to say to you," she said. "Then don't," Julian replied smoothly. "Just listen." Elena didn't answer. A long beat passed. If you'd like, he added, his voice more pointed now. We can discuss your brother's dialysis treatments out here. I'm sure your neighbors would love to hear about the overdue invoices from Mount Sinai. Her blood froze. What do you know about my brother? I know he's 20. I know he's on a donor list that moves slower than molasses, and I know that without a miracle, he won't see 30. And quite deduces. She slammed the door shut instinctively, then hesitated. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't threatened. He had spoken like a man who already knew too much. Elena's fingers hovered over the chain. A voice came from behind her, weak, sleep-blurred. Elena? Who is it? She turned toward the bedroom. Leo. Elena, Julian said, this time with an edge of gentleness. Let me in. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. She unhooked the chain and opened the door, but only slightly wider. Julian stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. He didn't gawk at the tiny living room or the peeling wallpaper or the boxes of discounted medication on the coffee table. He didn't sit either, just stood there, hands in his pockets, eyes locked on hers. Why are you here? She asked. He pulled a thin manila folder from his coat. Because you're not just a waitress. She tensed. You're Elena Vankova, he continued, his voice unreadable. Top of your class at Juilliard. A voice that once made the Met look twice. Until one night, during your conservatory debut, you collapsed on stage. And suddenly, the headlines changed. Drug rumors, meltdown. No one looked deeper. I don't want to talk about that, she said, backing away. He didn't move closer. Of course you don't. They turned you into a cautionary tale, a broken prodigy. But it was all manufactured. She stared at him. I found the trail, Julian said. The smear campaign came from a PR firm under the Thorne Group umbrella, and during that same year, their daughter, a certain mezzo-soprano named Isabella Thorne, just happened to lose the leading role to a certain Elena Vankova. Elena's breath caught. I don't know what you're trying to do, she whispered. You want to make this into a pity project? You feel bad for the girl you embarrassed in front of your rich friends, so now you want to fix her? No, he said bluntly. I don't do pity. I do strategy. She blinked. Excuse me? I need a wife, he said, like he was reading the weather. My grandfather's trust has a clause. I must be married by my 33rd birthday to assume full control of Blackwood Dynamics. That birthday is in 21 days. You're joking, Elena said flatly. I don't joke, Julian replied. Especially not about $10 billion. She stared at him like he'd lost his mind. And you're here. Why? You want me to marry you? You already did the impossible once, he said. You sang Mozart like it was war. You didn't run. You didn't cry. You stood there and burned. That's the kind of person I need standing next to me. Strong, smart, and currently, the only person in this city who hates Isabella Thorne as much as I do. Elena's laugh came out bitter and cracked. Let me get this straight. You want me to marry you so you can inherit your fortune and get revenge on your ex? Partly, Julian admitted, but also because I think the two of us could make each other untouchable. Why would I agree to this? He opened the folder, pulled out a check already signed. You're $62,000 in debt. Your brother's treatment is 2 steps away from being denied for non-payment. I can clear that by noon. Transfer him to the best private wing in Mount Sinai. Full specialist team. Elena stared at the paper. The number was obscene. This is a contract, she whispered. Yes, he said. 1 year. No physical expectations. Separate bedrooms. You play the part of Mrs. Blackwood. Public appearances. Board dinners. Galas. You wear the ring. I keep the company. You walk away with 10 million. Her throat felt dry. And, after a year, we divorce quietly. You go back to your life. Or don't. Change it. Do whatever you want. No strings. No lawsuits. No press leaks. And the singing? Only if you want to. But I think, he added softly, that silencing your voice is what's been killing you. She looked at the check again. Then at Julian. She thought of Leo's pale face. The nights of heating pads and expired pills. The afternoons spent choosing between groceries and medicine. Then she met Julian's eyes, cool, commanding, but not cruel. 1 year? She asked. 1 year, he said. And we're strictly professional. You don't get to own me. He almost smiled. Understood. Elena inhaled sharply. Fine. Draw up the papers. But I want it in writing, clause by clause. And I want a line that says we sleep in different wings. Already included, he said, holding out the file. I came prepared. She grabbed it, flipping through the pages, eyes darting over the language like a lawyer in court. After a moment, she whispered, You're insane. Possibly, Julian said. But so are you. A beat. She looked up. I'll do it. For Leo, not for you. Julian nodded once. Then pack a bag. Mrs. Blackwood. We've got a wedding to stage. Elena packed in silence. She moved through the apartment with mechanical focus, folding clothes she barely wore, placing them into a battered duffel bag that had seen better decades. Each motion felt unreal, like she was watching herself from a distance. Julian stood near the door, giving her space, checking his watch only once. You don't need much, he said. Everything you'll need is already waiting. That's not comforting, she replied without looking at him. He accepted that. She paused at Leo's bedroom door. The machine hummed steadily, a sound that had become the metronome of her life. She stepped inside and sat on the edge of his bed. I'm going to be gone for a bit, she said softly. Leo opened his eyes. Like, gone? No, she said quickly. Just staying somewhere else. A better place. With better doctors. He studied her face, the way he always did when he sensed half-truths. Is this about the man at the door? Yes. Is he trouble? She smiled faintly. He is complicated. Leo nodded. Then surprised her by squeezing her hand with more strength than she expected. Then be careful. And sing. If you need to. Her throat tightened. She leaned down and kissed his forehead. I promise. Jacked as mining. 20 minutes later, they were in Julian's car, gliding through the city streets like ghosts. The driver didn't speak. The windows were tinted. New York passed by in streaks of light, bodegas closing, taxis honking, couples arguing on corners. A world she knew. A world she was leaving. At least for now. You can still walk away, Julian said suddenly, his gaze fixed forward. Up until the papers are signed. And after, he exhaled. After, it gets complicated. She nodded. Story of my life. The courthouse was quiet at that hour. A side entrance. No cameras. No press. Just a clerk who looked tired and uninterested in fairy tales. Elena signed where she was told, her hand steady despite the pounding in her chest. Julian signed last. By the power vested in me, the clerk said flatly, I pronounce you husband and wife. No music, no kiss, just ink drying on paper. Julian turned to her. Welcome to the family. She met his eyes. This doesn't change who I am. Is note. Good, he said, because I don't want to change you. The penthouse was everything she expected and nothing she wanted. Glass. Steel. Silence. A view that swallowed the city whole. Elena stood near the entrance, duffel bag at her feet, feeling impossibly small in the open space. Your wing is down the hall, Julian said. Mine's on the opposite side. Arthur will bring your things tomorrow. A stylist, too. Unfortunately. She raised an eyebrow. Unfortunately? They don't listen well, he said. Tell them no if they push. She looked around. This place doesn't feel lived in. It isn't, he said simply. That night, Elena lay awake in a bed that was too soft, staring at a ceiling she didn't recognize. Somewhere beyond the walls, the city breathed. She thought of the contract on the desk downstairs, of Leo, of Isabella's face when she realized Elena hadn't broken. Justice isn't fair, she thought. But sometimes it's quiet. Down the hall, Julian stood at his window, the signed marriage certificate in his hand, realizing he had just set something in motion that money couldn't control. Julian's security team worked like clockwork. By sunrise, his penthouse had been transformed from the cold sanctuary of a reclusive billionaire into a well-staged backdrop for a love story. Floral arrangements arrived, photos of the happy couple artfully staged in Central Park hours earlier under dim lighting and controlled smiles were distributed to the press. Headlines popped like fireworks across social media. Julian Blackwood marries in secret ceremony. Billionaire's bride is a waitress? From serving wine to wearing diamonds. Who is Elena Vance? Elena woke to her name trending. She stared at her phone, blinking at the carefully cropped photos. One image showed her looking up at Julian as he helped her into a black car. She looked dazed. He looked polished, stoic. The perfect image of controlled affection. This is surreal, she whispered to herself, tossing the phone aside and stepping into the massive marble bathroom. It looked like a hotel's spa had swallowed a palace. Gold fixtures, rainfall shower, more towels than she'd need in a lifetime. A knock at the bedroom door startled her. Elena, a voice called gently. She opened it to find a woman in her early 50s, elegant, composed, dressed in tailored navy slacks and low heels. Her silver hair was swept into a bun. "I'm Ruth," the woman said. "Personal assistant to the Blackwood estate. Also, housekeeper, schedule manager, and unofficial truth detector." Elena blinked. "That's quite a resume." "I've worked for Mr. Blackwood since he was 17, Ruth added. "He said you might be overwhelmed this morning." "I'm not overwhelmed," Elena said. "I'm alert," Ruth smiled. "Good. Then let's begin. You're expected at the Blackwood Foundation Gala tonight. It's your first public appearance as Julian's wife. You'll need a gown, a press statement, and a very convincing smile." "Will anyone actually believe this?" Elena asked. "They already do," Ruth replied. "This city is built on facades. Yours just happens to be more interesting than most. It's seeding statt to en 12 winding." By noon, Elena had been fitted for a navy silk gown with sheer sleeves and subtle embroidery that shimmered when she moved. A makeup artist airbrushed her face into something barely recognizable. Someone else tamed her curls. Another adjusted her posture with quiet instructions. Shoulders back, chin up, slow steps. "You look like a senator's wife," the stylist said proudly. "I feel like a decoy," Elena muttered. She saw Julian only briefly before the gala. He was on the phone, barking instructions to a board member about supply chain losses. But when he spotted her across the foyer, he paused. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Then he ended the call. "You clean up well. You sound surprised." "I'm not. I did my research." Still sounds like a compliment with a spreadsheet attached. He smirked, offering his arm. "Shall we go, Mrs. Blackwood?" The gala was held at the Blackwood Foundation's private hall columns. Chandeliers, velvet, everything. A string quartet played near the entrance. Photographers clicked endlessly as the couple stepped onto the red carpet. Flashbulbs burst like lightning. Elena felt her jaw lock. Her cheeks stretch into the practiced smile Ruth had rehearsed with her. "She's stunning," someone whispered. "Julian's finally human," said another. "Elena Vance," a reporter called out. "Where did you two meet?" Julian answered before she could. "A restaurant downtown. I spilled wine on her. She sang to stop me from firing her. It worked." The crowd chuckled. Someone actually sighed. "Elena, are you planning to sing again?" a woman shouted from the back. Elena paused. She hadn't thought about it, hadn't even dared, but now 100 cameras waited for her answer. "I think," she said slowly, "every woman should get to choose when she raises her voice." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no, either. The flashbulbs flared brighter. Inside, the gala pulsed with music and wealth. Politicians mingled with CEOs. Old money sipped champagne with new. Elena stood beside Julian at the head table, nodding through introductions and false compliments. "Smile," he whispered, refilling her glass. "Are you enjoying this?" "Not even slightly," he said. "But you're doing fine." They danced once slow, rehearsed, for photos. His hand barely touched her waist. Her eyes didn't meet his. But still, people swooned. "America loves a fairy tale," Julian said afterward, slipping a glass of bourbon from a tray. "This isn't a fairy tale," Elena replied. "This is strategic theater. And yet," he said, You wear the crown well." She walked away before she could respond. Later that night, back at the penthouse, Elena kicked off her heels and stood barefoot in the middle of the grand hallway. Ruth had left her a cup of chamomile tea on a silver tray. The city glowed outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. Julian entered from his wing, still in his tux, but looser now, tie gone, sleeves rolled. "You did well tonight," he said, voice softer. "I felt like a prop," she replied. "Props don't steal headlines." She sipped her tea. "This will get messy." "It already is," he said, "but now we control the mess." She watched him, trying to read between his perfectly measured words. "I don't trust you," she said. "I don't expect you to. But I need to protect my brother." He nodded. "And I need to protect my company." A beat. "Then we have a truce," she said. He raised his glass. "To temporary alliances." She didn't toast, just walked past him toward her wing, her bare feet soundless against the floor. But as she disappeared down the hall, Julian found himself watching longer than he meant to. There was something dangerous about a woman who had lost everything and still knew how to command a room. Elena's second week as Julian Blackwood's wife began with a dinner invitation disguised as a declaration of war. An envelope sat on her dressing table when she returned from visiting Leo at the hospital, embossed, cream-colored, with her name written in swirling calligraphy that tried too hard to be charming. She recognized the handwriting instantly. Isabella Thorne. She opened it. "Darling Elena, it's so thrilling to see Julian finally settled. I do hope marriage agrees with you. Please join us for an intimate gathering this Thursday at the Thorne Estate in Hudson Valley. Bring Julian, of course. I can't wait to hear your voice again. With all my love, Isabella, asterisk, asterisk." There was no mistaking it. This was not an invitation, it was a trap. Elena stood in silence, rereading the words. She could almost hear Isabella's voice behind them, sweet, syrupy, and dipped in venom. She brought the note to Julian in the library. He barely looked up from the tablet in his hands. "Let me guess. Embossed, overly perfumed, passive-aggressive as hell. So she does this often?" Elena asked, holding it out. Julian took the invitation, scanned it, then flicked it onto the coffee table. "Every year, same date. The family dinner, designed to intimidate new board members, insult old allies, and remind everyone that the Thorne name still has claws. She wants to see how rattled I get in person." He nodded. "Of course. You humiliated her. She's wounded. She'll want blood, but dressed up as gossip." Elena exhaled slowly. "Do we have to go?" "Yes," he said simply, "and you have to win." The drive to the Thorne estate was long, winding, and lined with leafless trees that looked like arthritic hands clawing at the sky. The mansion loomed like something out of a forgotten Gilded Age. All stone and pride. Inside, soft jazz played and money shimmered on every surface. The guest list was curated. Powerful men, perfectly preserved women, lawyers with sharp smiles, and heirs bored by their own legacies. Isabella appeared at the top of the staircase, draped in red satin, her blonde curls pinned just so. She descended like a monarch greeting subjects. "Elena," she said warmly, kissing the air near her cheek. "You look divine." "You too," Elena replied coolly, "though you forgot to finish your dress." Redding to beezing. Isabella's eyes flared just a flicker, but her smile didn't waver. "Oh, darling," she said sweetly. "Julian always did like strays. Good thing I bite." Julian arrived at Elena's side with a glass of wine, his presence cold and deliberate. "Isabella," he said flatly, "I see your theater budget hasn't shrunk." "Julian," she purred. Still brooding in black, the three stood locked in polite combat until a waiter passed by, diffusing the tension. Elena sipped her drink, eyes scanning the room. Everyone was watching them, measuring her, waiting for her to slip. The dinner table was long, candlelit, theatrical. Elena was seated directly across from Isabella, naturally. Conversation flowed like poisoned honey stock prices, diplomatic scandals, foundation grants. But every word was aimed like a dagger. "So, Elena," one guest asked, "when did you know you were ready to be a wife?" Elena smiled, poised. "About 5 minutes before I said, I do. Life doesn't always come with notice." A chuckle, some impressed murmurs. "And are you planning to return to the stage?" Isabella asked, twirling her wine. "Or is Mozart just for emergencies now?" Elena leaned forward. "Mozart is like lightning. You don't chase it. You become it." Even Julian paused at that. Isabella lifted her glass in mock toast. "How poetic. How predictable," Elena replied softly. The table froze. Julian spoke then, his voice calm but sharp. "Perhaps we can return to the topic of the Blackwood-Thorne merger. After all, that's why we're here." Isabella's smile cracked. Of course. After dinner, as guests migrated to the lounge, Julian pulled Elena aside into a quiet alcove. "You're good at this," he said. "I've had practice," she replied, "pretending I belong in rooms where people want me out." He studied her. "There's a board meeting next week," he said. "Full council. They'll vote on expanding the foundation's community outreach. I want you there." She blinked. "Why me?" "Because you're not just window dressing. You speak like you've fought for your place. They'll hear that." She hesitated. "Are you trying to use me as a symbol?" "No," Julian said. "I'm asking you to be a weapon." That night, in the car back to the city, Elena sat in silence. Julian scrolled through his phone, then paused. "You're trending again," he said. She didn't look. "Good or bad?" "A bit of both, but mostly good." She leaned her head against the window. "This world yours, it's exhausting. You get used to it." "I don't want to get used to it." Julian didn't answer. Back in the penthouse, Elena went straight to her room. She dropped her earrings onto the dresser, wiped the makeup from her face, and stared into the mirror. The woman staring back at her looked elegant, strong. But behind her eyes was something ancient. Survival. She thought of Leo, of the hospital bills paid, of the silence at the gala when she spoke her truth, of Isabella's fury, masked as civility. This isn't just about pretending anymore, she realized. It's about power, and for the first time in years, she wasn't hiding. She was rising. The morning sunlight filtered through the massive windows of the penthouse, casting long golden bars across the floor like a silent prison. Elena stood barefoot in the kitchen, a steaming mug of coffee in her hands, watching the city stir beneath her. For a few brief seconds, the world felt quiet. Then Ruth entered, her steps light but direct. "Mr. Blackwood is in the conference room. He's asked for you." Elena arched an eyebrow. "Conference room? In the house?" Ruth gave a small smile. "You're not just in his home anymore. You're in his war zone." I canned. 5 minutes later, Elena stepped into a sleek, glass-walled room at the far end of the penthouse. A long table sat at the center, ringed with monitors and confidential documents. Julian stood at the head, sleeves rolled, tie discarded. Across from him sat Arthur, his head of security and information, tapping through a secure laptop feed. "Morning," Julian said without looking up. "We have a situation." Elena sat, cradling her coffee like armor. "If it's another fake headline, I'm not worried." "It's not fake," Arthur cut in, "but it is manipulated." He turned the laptop toward her. A photo. It showed her at the hospital the day before outside Leo's dialysis wing, carrying a grocery bag and a folder of medical files. She looked tired, human. Below it, a headline from a tabloid gossip site. "From nursemaid to heiress. Is Elena Vance using illness to win sympathy?" Her heart dropped. Julian slid a second file across the table. "This came from the Thorne media circle. Isabella's playing dirty. They dug into your brother's condition and your financial history." Elena's mouth went dry. "She's weaponizing Leo? She wants to discredit your narrative, undermine your story before it spreads too far." Elena stared at the grainy photo. It felt like a violation, not just of her privacy but of her humanity. Leo hadn't asked to be part of this game. "I want to sue," she said coldly, "for defamation, privacy breach." You can," Julian replied. "But they'll claim public interest. You're married to one of the most visible men in America now." The lines blur. She stood, pacing. "So what, she gets to drag my brother into her revenge fantasy and I just let her?" Julian watched her, fingers steepled. No. We strike back. But smartly. Arthur tapped the keyboard again. A new image appeared. Isabella. Same night as the gala. But this time, behind the scenes arguing viciously with a board member. Another shot showed her with an open wine bottle in the back seat of a car, face flushed. She's slipping, Arthur said. And we've got proof. Julian turned to Elena. We use this, quietly. We leak just enough to question her stability, let her board worry about her long-term leadership. Elena hesitated. You're asking me to go full political assassin. I'm offering you control, Julian said. She crossed her arms. And what if I want to play a different game? Then you tell me what that game is, he said evenly. Because this isn't going away. Not next week. Not next year. You think Isabella will stop after one headline? Elena looked down at her coffee. The steam had gone cold. I just wanted to protect my brother, she whispered. Julian's voice softened. Then let me help you protect him. And yourself. That afternoon, Elena made a call to a journalist she trusted. One from her Juilliard days. They met at a quiet cafe near Washington Square, low profile, away from the chaos. Her voice was calm as she spoke. You want a real story? Not a scandal? I've got one, and I'll go on record. The journalist leaned forward. You're going to talk? Not about Julian, she clarified. About the system. About what happened to me. How reputations can be bought and destroyed in a phone call. The journalist blinked. You're going after the Thorne family? I'm telling the truth. If it happens to me, it happens to women with less privilege, less voice. Later, as she walked back toward the waiting car, Elena felt something crackle in her chest. Not fear. Not regret. Power. The next morning, Julian found her in the dining room, flipping through the Sunday paper. Her op-ed had gone live overnight. The Price of Silence, How One Voice Refused to Stay Buried, by Elena Vance Blackwood. He read it quietly, expression unreadable. You didn't ask for permission, he finally said. I don't need it, she replied. He folded the paper. No, you don't. The silence between them was different now. Less guarded. Charged with something neither of them was ready to name. Isabella will retaliate, he warned. She already has, Elena said. Now it's my turn. A beat passed. Then he smirked faintly. Mrs. Blackwood, you're beginning to scare me. Good, she said, standing. Then I'm doing it right. Is tenant. The sky over Manhattan that morning was a dull gray, heavy with mist. Like the city was holding its breath. Elena sat alone on the penthouse balcony, wrapped in a thick wool shawl Ruth had brought her without asking. She sipped lukewarm tea and watched the traffic move far below, like tiny red ants. Somewhere deep in the skyline, she imagined Isabella screaming into a designer pillow. The article had hit harder than even Julian expected. Dozens of outlets picked it up overnight. Talk shows were already dissecting every sentence. Her words, raw, specific, unapologetically intelligent, struck a nerve, especially among women. She hadn't played the victim. She'd told the truth. By noon, the Blackwood Foundation's public relations team had already fielded 37 interview requests. Julian canceled all of them. She said what she needed to say, he told the team. Let the silence speak next. But silence had a way of stirring ghosts. Later that afternoon, Ruth appeared in the library holding a letter. Hand-delivered, she said. Elena opened it carefully. Inside was a note, typed in clean serif font. No return address. No signature. You were never meant to rise. Walk away before someone buries you again. She read it twice, her jaw tightening. Ruth raised an eyebrow. Trouble? A coward, Elena said simply, folding the paper and setting it aside. One who forgot I've been buried before. Ruth didn't press, but as she turned to leave, she added quietly, the ones who rise from the grave are always the most dangerous. That evening, Julian returned home late from a board meeting. His jaw was tight, his coat dusted with rain. Elena met him in the hallway. You look like you argued with a ghost, she said. I did, he muttered. His name is Harold Thorne. She stiffened. Isabella's father? Julian nodded, pulling off his gloves. He called an emergency vote, tried to revoke our joint venture. Said your op-ed showed emotional instability. And? Julian gave her a thin smile. It failed. 7-4. They didn't want to go up against a woman trending with 1,000 retweets a minute. Elena exhaled. So what now? Now. He loosened his tie. Now we start using their weapons. The next day, Ruth guided Elena to a small music room tucked behind the east wing. It had been untouched for years. Dusty, yes, but beautiful. A baby grand piano sat near a stained glass window. Shelves of forgotten sheet music lined the walls. Mr. Blackwood thought you might want this, Ruth said simply. Elena ran her fingers along the edge of the piano. The keys were slightly out of tune, but still familiar. That night, she returned to the room alone. The silence wrapped around her like a coat she had once worn too long. Slowly, hesitantly, she sat, opened the lid, laid her fingers on the ivory, then one note, then another, then, without thinking, she sang, not loud, not for an audience, just for herself. Mozart, Laudate Dominum, a hymn, one she'd buried years ago beneath shame and silence. Her voice trembled at first, but then grew sure. Full, rich, unapologetic, she sang until her eyes burned. She didn't hear Julian at the door. He watched from the shadows, his expression unreadable. When she finally stopped, he spoke quietly. You're not just a singer. She turned, startled. How long were you there? Long enough. Their eyes held. I thought you said music wasn't part of the deal, she said. He stepped forward slowly. Music was always the deal, Elena. I just didn't realize it until now. A pause. Do you want to perform again? He asked. She hesitated. I don't know. Then let me ask another way. Do you want the people who silenced you to hear what they missed? Elena didn't smile, but something sharper lit her gaze. Yes, he nodded once. Then let's make them listen. Note, the invitations went out within 48 hours. Black cardstock, gold trim, and a single line in elegant script. An evening of music and truth, featuring Elena Vance Blackwood. No sponsor logos, no program notes, just her name. Julian arranged everything. A private performance hall in Soho. The same one where, 7 years ago, Elena had collapsed under the stage lights at her Juilliard debut. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. Least of all her. Why here? She had asked when he first proposed it. Because if you're going to rise, Julian had said, you do it where they buried you. The performance was billed as a charity benefit, proceeds going to the Blackwood Foundation's Arts Education Initiative for underfunded public schools. But everyone in the city knew the truth. This was a declaration. Elena was stepping back into the arena, not with a whisper, but with thunder. She chose the set list herself. Mozart, of course, but also Gershwin, spirituals, and a haunting contemporary piece composed by a forgotten woman who had died waiting for her voice to be heard. Ruth watched the preparations with quiet pride. This will upset them, she said. I know, Elena replied. Good. The night arrived like a storm. The crowd was a who's who of New York power. Celebrities, donors, gallery owners, former professors, news anchors, every seat filled. Even Harold Thorne showed up, red-faced and scowling, seated 2 rows from the front. Isabella sat beside him, in silver and spite. Backstage, Elena stood in the wings. She wore deep green satin, elegant, simple. No diamonds. No theatrics. Just the woman she had become. Julian entered quietly, holding a small box. I got you something, he said, handing it to her. She opened it. A silver pendant shaped like a broken music note, fractured, but whole. It's ugly, she said, eyes glinting. It's honest, he replied, like your voice. A pause. You don't have to prove anything tonight, he added softly. I'm not doing this to prove anything, she said. I'm doing it to finish what they tried to end. And then she stepped onto the stage. The hall went silent. For a moment, Elena just stood there, breathing in the tension, the history, the ghost of the girl she used to be. Then she began. Her voice wasn't sweet. It was powerful, clear, laced with grief, with survival, with defiance. Each note carved through the air like a blade. She sang Mozart's Vado, ma dove, a song of longing. of uncertainty, of someone torn between staying and fleeing. Her eyes stayed open the entire time, staring into the audience, daring them to look away. No one did. When the final note fell, the room stayed silent for several long seconds. Then the applause erupted like a wave breaking against a dam. It rose and rose, people standing, cheering, crying. Some clapped out of guilt, others out of awe. But all of them clapped. Julian remained at the back, his hands still. He didn't applaud, he simply watched, because he had known from the beginning this moment wasn't about him. It never had been. After the show, backstage, Elena found herself surrounded by old professors, reporters, and complete strangers praising her performance. She thanked them, but her eyes kept drifting toward the far end of the room, where Isabella stood alone. Their eyes met. Isabella approached, heels clicking like accusations. "I hope you enjoyed your moment," she said. "It won't last." Elena smiled slightly. "Neither did your reign." Isabella's mouth twisted. "You think because you hit a few notes that you've changed the game?" "No," Elena replied. "I think I reminded people that the game was rigged, too." With that, she turned and walked away, the echo of her heels sounding like a closing door. Later that night, back at the penthouse, Elena stood by the window, barefoot, sipping red wine in silence. Julian joined her, unbuttoning his collar. "You sang like fire," he said. She didn't turn. "I sang like me." A beat passed. "I meant what I said," Julian added. "You don't have to keep pretending." She looked at him now, her voice quiet. "Neither do you." Their eyes held, and for the first time, the space between them wasn't filled with strategy or silence. Just breath, just presence. The days after the performance blurred into headlines, meetings, and unexpected fame. Articles called it a comeback, though Elena never remembered signing off on leaving in the first place. Some praised her courage. Others questioned her motives. One particularly condescending columnist dubbed her the People's Nightingale. She rolled her eyes at that. But behind all the noise, something deeper had shifted. People didn't look at her like she was invisible anymore. And that, in itself, was power. Leo had watched the live stream from his hospital bed, propped up with blankets and smiling like a kid who'd just seen his big sister conquer the moon. She visited him every afternoon, reading him the nice headlines and skipping the ones that twisted her story into fiction. "You looked taller on stage," he said once, holding her hand. "That's just the heels," she joked. "No," he said. "You looked like you didn't owe anyone anything." Her heart ached at the truth in that. But not everyone celebrated her rise. The letter came 3 days after the concert, hand-delivered again. No return address. Inside was a single photo. A snapshot of Leo, in the hospital parking lot, waiting for his dialysis transport. The photo was taken from a distance. On the back, 4 typed words: "He pays for you." Elena didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply walked the envelope into Julian's office and set it on his desk without a word. He read it. His jaw tensed. "Get Arthur," he said. 15 minutes later, the penthouse was a command center. Security cameras pulled up, threat profiles reviewed. Arthur launched a trace, while Julian scrolled through board logs, donor lists, anyone with enough reason to hit below the belt. "This wasn't Isabella," Arthur said at last. "Too precise, too quiet. She throws punches in public." "Then who?" Elena asked. Julian looked at her. "Someone who wants to break you before they try to buy you." Elena clenched her fists. "They're using Leo now, threatening a disabled kid. That's not just cowardice, that's war." That night, she sat beside Leo as he slept, his chest rising and falling in rhythm with the monitor's beeps. She thought about how fragile safety really was, how fame didn't come with armor, only a larger target. When she returned home, Julian was waiting in the library with a dossier. "His name's Mason Grant," he said. "Private investigator. Ex-military. Formerly freelance. Now bankrolled by Thorn Global's shadow fund. He's been surveilling you for 2 weeks. Why? To find pressure points, make you fold." Elena scanned the dossier. Grant's photo stared back, square jaw, clean cut, the type of man who made himself forgettable. "He's been in the system long enough to know where to hide," Julian added. "But I can find him. And I can bury him. She set the file down. No. Not yet. Julian blinked. Why not? Because I want to see who else he's working with, and I want them to think I'm scared, just for a little while. Julian leaned forward. That's dangerous. So is pretending we're safe. The next morning, Elena walked into the Blackwood Foundation offices alone. No press, no PR handler. Just her, in a navy pantsuit and low heels, hair pulled back, eyes like polished glass. She requested a private meeting with the executive board. They didn't expect her. They didn't expect what she brought either. She laid the envelope on the table, the photo of Leo, the typed threat. I'm not here to ask for protection, she began. I'm here to remind you that when one of us is targeted, all of us are vulnerable. You think this is just about me. It's not. It's about the culture you've built where power can silence truth and threats hide behind polished doors. A pause. I'm not asking you to care, she said. I'm asking you to choose what side of history you want your name attached to. Then she stood, thanked them for their time, and walked out. By the end of the day, 2 board members resigned. That evening, Julian stood by the balcony again, a glass of scotch in hand, staring out at the city. Elena joined him, barefoot as always. You're forcing everyone's hand, he said without turning. They forced mine first. He took a sip. You scare me sometimes. She glanced sideways. Still? He finally looked at her. More than ever. They stood there in silence. Then, softly, she said, I used to think trauma made you quieter. He didn't respond. But it doesn't, she continued. It just tunes your voice into a pitch only certain people can hear. The ones who've felt it too. He nodded slowly. You're not alone in this, you know. I never was, she whispered. I just needed to remember how to fight. The summons arrived not with a knock, but with a courier buttoned suit, tight jaw, no eye contact. Julian opened the envelope without ceremony, his brows knit. Elena, across the room, froze. What is it? She asked, bracing herself. He passed her the letter, its weight heavier than paper should allow. Notice of Judicial Review. Elena Vance Blackwood. Statement to appear. Issued by the State Ethics Council for Corporate Malfeasance and Influence. Subject: potential impropriety related to Blackwood-Thorne merger and recent public statements. Elena's blood turned cold. They're trying to drag me into court? She whispered. Over an op-ed and a charity concert? Julian nodded once, jaw clenched. They're not trying to convict you. They're trying to stall us, embarrass you, scare our board into pulling out. Ekin. Elena sat down slowly, the edges of her world tilting. This has Harold Thorne written all over it, she muttered. He's turning the system into a weapon. He built the system, Julian said. He just never expected someone like you to shake it. Later that afternoon, Arthur confirmed it. Harold had personally filed an ethics complaint, citing unqualified influence by Elena over foundation decisions. It was a baseless move, but one designed to be loud, messy, and humiliating. We're going to fight this, Julian said, already pacing. I've got a legal team with enough teeth to bite back. Elena shook her head. No, I'll testify. Julian stopped. What? She looked up, calm but resolute. I won't run. I won't hide. You and I may have started this with strategy, but it turned into something else. They think they can shame me into silence again. I won't let them. He studied her like she was a different person, a woman who had walked through fire and chosen to turn around and face the flames again. Then we do this, he said finally, but not their way. Ours. The hearing was scheduled for Friday. The courtroom wouldn't be televised, but everyone knew the press would be waiting outside like vultures. On the day of, Elena dressed herself. No stylist, no makeup artist, just a simple charcoal gray dress, low heels, hair pinned back. She looked like herself, and that was the most dangerous version of her yet. As they exited the car, reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed. Elena, do you believe you're being targeted? Are you using your marriage to manipulate foundation policy? Are the rumors about your brother's condition being staged true? She stopped just once, mid-step, turned to the crowd. My brother's illness is real, so is my voice. If you're here to watch a woman be torn down, you're going to be disappointed. Tense to tuna. Then she walked forward, head high. Inside the courtroom, she sat between two lawyers, across from a panel of 5 officials. Harold Thorne sat at the far end of the gallery, smug behind his folded hands. Isabella wasn't with him, but Elena could feel her absence like a shadow. The lead ethics officer began the questioning. You've been accused of influencing philanthropic allocations within the Blackwood Foundation. Do you deny this? I do not, Elena said clearly. Gasps rippled through the room. She continued before anyone could interrupt. I've advocated for causes that were underfunded. I've spoken on behalf of schools, shelters, community centers. If that's called influence, then yes, I've used my voice. But I did so with transparency, integrity, and without personal gain. The officer raised an eyebrow. You admit to leveraging your marriage? I admit to surviving it, she said. You all watched my story unfold in headlines and photos. But the part you didn't see is the one where I lost everything before I gained anything. Another panelist leaned in. Do you believe your presence compromises Mr. Blackwood's decisions? Elena looked at Julian, seated behind her. No, she said. I believe it enhances them. Because I see the people who get ignored when policy becomes profit. Murmurs echoed around the courtroom. Then came the surprise. Harold Thorne stood. Permission to speak? He asked, too casually. The lead officer hesitated, then nodded. Briefly, Harold adjusted his cufflinks. I only ask the council to consider the long-term implications of allowing someone with limited corporate experience to exert disproportionate influence over billions in philanthropic funds. This isn't personal, it's precedent. Elena smiled thinly. That's funny. Because when you sent someone to photograph my brother in a hospital parking lot, it felt personal. Harold blinked. His confidence cracked for just a breath. Objection, one of his lawyers muttered, but the panel leaned forward. You did what? One officer asked. I have the photo, Elena said, sliding a sealed envelope across the table. And the typed threat. Ask yourselves, is this the behavior of someone concerned with ethics or power? The panel reviewed the evidence. Whispers turned into conversations. Elena sat quietly, knowing she'd struck true. After a tense half-hour, the council adjourned for deliberation. Julian joined her in the waiting lounge. You just destroyed him, he said. No, she replied. I exposed him. He'll destroy himself. When the verdict was announced later that evening, the courtroom was silent. The council finds no evidence of wrongdoing by Elena Vance Blackwood. All charges dismissed. A breath. Then a roar of applause from the hallway outside. Members of the press, foundation staff, and a few people Elena didn't even recognize. Survivors. Strangers. Women who now saw her as something more than just a headline. Back in the penthouse that night, Elena poured herself a glass of wine and stood by the window as the city glowed. Julian joined her in silence. After a while, he said, I don't think you were ever meant to be anyone's wife. She laughed softly. Good, because I think I was meant to be my own legend. The next morning, Elena awoke not to the usual hum of New York traffic or Ruth's quiet knock, but to complete silence. Not peace, silence. The kind that comes after a storm, before the damage is counted. Julian was gone from the penthouse, leaving only a note on the kitchen counter. Meeting with the Singapore partners. Back late. Arthur has your security detail on standby. Don't go out alone. She frowned. He was distant, lately measured. Watching her from across rooms like she was no longer a piece in his strategy but something he couldn't fully hold. A wind changing direction. Or a storm he'd helped unleash but didn't know how to stop. She couldn't blame him. Everything about their arrangement had shifted. What began as performance had become dangerously, quietly real. Elena spent the morning pacing. She read half of a novel, made notes for a possible foundation speech, and tried to forget the photo of Leo that haunted her every time she blinked. She knew they were safe for now, but the threat hadn't vanished. It had simply gone quiet. Like the city itself, by midday, she gave in and took a walk just around the block, flanked by Arthur's men in plain clothes. She wore sunglasses and a scarf, but still, a woman on the street recognized her. You're the one who sang at the benefit, the woman whispered. That song saved me. Thank you. Elena nodded, throat tight. You saved yourself. Back at the penthouse, Ruth met her with a small package. No label, no return address. Elena opened it cautiously. Inside was a cassette tape, real, analog, a relic. Taped to it was a note, written in delicate cursive. Before the silence, you sang, "Don't forget her." No signature. Elena blinked, her heart suddenly thudding. The tape felt cold in her hand like memory made solid. She hadn't used a cassette player in over a decade. Ruth brought one from storage. "I figured you might want to be alone," she said, and left without another word. Elena sat cross-legged on the library floor, placed the tape inside the old stereo, and pressed play. At first, static, then her voice, younger, unbroken, full of hope. A recording from Juilliard, a forgotten rehearsal, her singing Pi Jesu, crystal clear and trembling with innocence. She hadn't heard it since the night of the gala years ago, before Isabella's sabotage, before the scandal, before the collapse. It was like hearing the ghost of the girl she used to be. She listened to the whole thing, unmoving. When it ended, she rewound it and pressed play again. Halfway through the third, "Listen," Julian returned. He found her still sitting on the floor, eyes wet but calm, staring at nothing. He crouched beside her, watching her. "You okay?" he asked gently. She didn't look at him. "I don't know. Where did that come from?" She held up the case. "No idea. But someone remembers me. The real me." He looked at the stereo. "You miss her?" "I mourn her." Julian didn't speak for a long time. Then, finally, "You know, most people spend their lives running from who they were." She turned to face him. "And I've spent mine running back. What it is now." He reached for her hand, not out of habit or strategy, but something else. Fragility. Recognition. "Elena," he said, "I need you to know something." She waited. "I didn't expect you to change me." "But you did." Her throat tightened. "That wasn't the plan." "I know." He smiled faintly. "That's why it worked." They sat in silence, the kind not born of fear or power, but understanding. The kind of silence that fills the space between two people who've been broken, and somehow survived long enough to recognize their own reflections in each other. The next morning, she returned to the music room. This time, not to sing, to write. Notes, lyrics, chords. A song that hadn't existed until the weight of survival demanded it be born. It wasn't a requiem. It was a rebirth. Later that week, she would perform it in secret, in a dimly lit studio on the Lower East Side with a local string quartet and a producer who owed her nothing. She wouldn't promote it, wouldn't sell it. She'd just let it exist. A record that said, "I'm still here." And for some people, that would be enough to start breathing again. The song "Still Here" found its way into the world quietly. No press release, no sponsor, no producer's name in bold font. Just an upload to a barely used artist account under Elena's full birth name, Elena Vance. No Blackwood, no legacy, just her. Within 24 hours, it had 10,000 plays. By the end of the week, it crossed 2 million. People didn't just listen, they wept. They shared it in group chats, played it in support groups, whispered about it in hospice rooms, and sent it to daughters they hadn't spoken to in years. It was raw and defiant, beautiful without being polished, grief laid bare. Julian didn't speak about it. But every night since the release, he returned to the penthouse just after midnight, poured a drink, and sat in the music room, replaying the track through the speakers. He listened like it was prayer. But while the world softened to Elena's voice, the war behind the scenes sharpened its knives. One morning, Arthur strode into the penthouse with a grim face and a folder in hand. Ruth stepped out of his way without a word. Elena looked up from her coffee. "What now?" she asked, already exhausted. Arthur set the folder down. Offshore accounts, obfuscated donations, and this, he pulled out a printed email, is from someone inside. Thorn Global. Anonymous leak. Elena scanned the document. It was short, clinical, a directive to a private contractor. Discredit the Blackwood woman. If public sympathy continues, target the brother again. No visible harm, just fear. Her blood ran cold. "They're not backing off," she said. Julian took the paper, scanning it. his jaw flexing once. They're escalating. Elena stood, her hands shaking just slightly. We need to go public. Julian looked up. That's what they want. You go public, they spin it as paranoia, hysteria, and it gives them more airtime. She paced. So what do we do? Nothing. Arthur cleared his throat. Actually, there's someone who wants to meet you. Off the record. She used to work for Thorne. Legal division. Whistleblower. Why now? Elena asked. Because, Arthur said, your song reached her daughter. She cried, and then asked why someone like that lady had to be treated like a threat. Elena swallowed the lump in her throat. Set it up. 2 days later, in a small church basement in Queens, Elena met the woman. Her name was Marie Hensley, mid-50s, smart gray eyes, and a voice that had been quiet too long. I signed too many NDAs to be useful, Marie said, sipping bad coffee from a paper cup. But I can tell you this. Harold Thorne runs his empire like a cold-blooded god. He doesn't attack randomly, he isolates, weakens, then destroys. Elena leaned in. Why target me? Because you broke script, Marie replied. You weren't supposed to matter. You weren't supposed to rise. Your voice, it makes people remember what they buried. She reached into her purse, handed Elena a USB. What's this? Patterns, donations disguised as scholarships, research grants funneled into lobbyists, and one name that keeps popping up in connection with the private security firm tailing your brother. Elena stared at it. You risked a lot. Marie smiled sadly. You reminded me of who I used to be, before I traded my conscience for comfort. Elena left that night with a new purpose burning in her chest. This wasn't just her story anymore. It was hundreds, thousands, the quiet casualties of systems that favored silence. Back at the penthouse, she handed the USB to Arthur. Verify everything. Then, we drop it. Arthur nodded. Publicly? No, she said. We start small. Grassroots journalists, underground forums. The truth needs time to breathe before the sharks smell blood. Julian studied her from across the room. You're becoming a tactician. No, she said. I'm becoming a survivor who learned to hit back. That night, she returned to the music room, not to sing, but to write again. This time, it wasn't a song. It was a letter. A manifesto. A story told in truth, without embellishment. She wrote until her hand cramped, until her vision blurred. When she was done, she printed it, folded it, and mailed it not to a journalist, not to a donor, but to a girl in Ohio who had sent her a letter days earlier, scrawled in a child's handwriting. Your song made me brave enough to sing in front of my class. They laughed, but I kept singing. A1. Elena added a note. They laughed at me once too. Now they listen. So will they listen to you. And in that quiet, powerful act, Elena found something no court could rule on, no billionaire could suppress. Legacy. It was nearly midnight when the knock came. Not loud, not rushed, just deliberate, measured. Elena was alone in the penthouse. Julian was at a charity gala upstate, and Arthur had left her with a double rotation of security. Still, the knock sliced through the quiet like a thread snapping. Ruth appeared seconds later, eyes sharp. I checked the monitors, she said. No one's there. Elena paused. You're sure? Ruth gave a small nod. Absolutely. Elena walked to the front door anyway. Something in her bones stirred a cold memory. Not quite fear, but close. She opened the door. Empty hallway, just as Ruth had said, except, on the floor, a manila envelope. No address, no markings, no tape. Ruth scooped it up and handed it over. I'll check the cameras again. Don't touch anything else until I'm back. Elena took the envelope and sat down on the sofa. She stared at it for a long beat, pulse drumming in her ears. She opened it. Inside, photos of her, in the music room, on the balcony, at Leo's hospital, at the church in Queens. Some recent, some grainy, all taken from angles that meant whoever took them had gotten close, too close, and tucked behind the stack, a single newspaper clipping. Aspiring mezzo-soprano collapses mid-performance at Juilliard. Exhaustion or embarrassment. The date, 7 years ago. The gala. The fall. The moment everything cracked. On the back, handwritten in sharp red ink. They watched you fall then. They're watching now. Elena's stomach twisted, but beneath the fear was something colder. Harder. Resolve. She took the entire envelope to the fireplace, lit a match, and watched it burn. When Julian returned 2 hours later, Elena was still awake, seated at the dining table, staring at the flame of a single candle. "They're getting closer," she said simply. Julian set down his coat. "What did they send?" "Ghosts." He sat beside her. "You want to run?" She turned to him slowly. "I want to finish this." The next morning, Arthur reviewed the footage. It had been wiped. Someone had overridden the security feed for precisely 90 seconds. No trace. "Inside job?" Elena asked. Arthur hesitated. "Possibly. Or someone with Thorn-level clearance." Julian leaned over his shoulder. "Get me every name connected to the Thorn family's private contractors in the last 10 years. Anyone with hacking expertise or surveillance clearances. And Elena," Arthur added, "you should stay off the street." "No," she said. "I'm going to Leo. I have takes Evamond." Julian raised an eyebrow. "It's not safe." "It's never been safe," she snapped. "But he's my brother, and he needs to see I'm not hiding." At the hospital, Leo was waiting with a deck of cards and 2 chocolate milks. He grinned when she entered. "Thought you'd bail today." "Never," she said, sitting beside him. They played rummy, as always. And for a few minutes, the world felt still again. Safe. But when Elena reached for her phone, she noticed a new voicemail, no number listed. She played it on speaker. Static. A faint hum. Then, a man's voice, low, distorted. "The higher you climb, the longer the fall." Leo froze. "Was that for you?" She shut it off. "No. That was for all of us." That night, Elena stood in the studio again. But this time, she didn't sing. She recorded the voicemail, layered it beneath a spoken word track she'd written that morning. Lines like, "They fear the sound of a woman who didn't die when they told her to." Quote, "They study silence like it's a weapon, forgetting it always breaks." She titled it, "The Fall." It wasn't music, it was a warning, and she posted it anonymously. Within hours, it went viral. Not for melody, not for beauty, but for truth. It hit something raw, especially in women who had climbed too far in spaces that weren't built for them. And for the first time, the ones in the shadows, the ones sending envelopes, tapping lines, erasing cameras, realized they were being watched too. By her, by all of them. Harold Thorne didn't believe in subtlety. When he summoned Julian Blackwood, it wasn't via lawyer or assistant. It was a handwritten note on heavy stock, hand-delivered to Blackwood Tower, with an embossed seal. The message, "Dinner, my home, tomorrow. We settle this like men." Julian read it once, then crumpled it. But Arthur urged him to go. "If he's calling you in," Arthur said, "he thinks he's losing." Julian snorted. "Or he's laying bait." Arthur shrugged. "Sometimes, the lion opens his mouth wide so you can see the rot inside." The following night, Julian arrived at Thorne's estate in Westchester, a fortress masquerading as a mansion. Stone walls, private guards, a lawn so perfect it looked artificial, the kind of place built not for living, but for ruling. Harold met him at the door, aged like iron. Rigid, cold, sharpened by years of power used without question. "Come in," he said. "Leave your pride at the door." Julian stepped inside. They dined in a private room lined with oil paintings of dead men who had likely owned more than they should have. The table was long enough to seat 10, but only 2 chairs were used opposite ends. The first 20 minutes were quiet. Soup, wine, small talk wrapped in threats. Finally, Harold put down his glass. "You could have had it all, Julian." "I do," Julian replied. Harold chuckled. "You've got noise. A girl with a wounded voice. A public that forgets by Friday. That's not power. That's theater." Julian leaned forward. "And what is power to you, Harold? Buying silence? Threatening a disabled boy? That's not power. That's fear pretending to be legacy." Harold's smile faded. "You married her for leverage. I saw the paperwork. The prenup. The NDA drafts." Julian didn't flinch. "And then I tore them up." "Why?" Julian stood. Because I've built towers out of silence, and she made me want to build something that breathes. A long silence stretched between them. Then Harold rose too. She's your weakness. Julian's voice dropped. She's my reckoning. He left the estate without another word, the door closing behind him with a heavy echo. Back at the penthouse, Elena was seated at the piano, not playing, just resting her fingers on the keys. You went, she said as he entered. Yes, and Julian loosened his tie. He wanted a war. I gave him a prophecy. She looked at him now. Truly saw him. The strain, the weight, the shift. He's going to come harder now, she said. Julian nodded. Let him. Elena turned to the piano, played a few notes low, slow, almost mournful. Do you remember, she said softly, what I told you the first day we met? Julian smiled faintly. You said my world was built on borrowed time. I was wrong, she said. It was built on borrowed silence. She played again, this time the opening bars of Still Here, slower, as if dragging the past into the present. You know, Julian said, voice low. When I first heard you sing, I thought, God, this woman will ruin everything. Elena looked over. And now? He walked to her, gently closed the piano lid. Now I think you might save it. Outside, the city pulsed, unaware. But inside, the first lines of a final act were beginning to write themselves. The first bomb didn't fall in headlines. It fell in court. A sealed indictment, federal naming Harold Thorne and several Thorne global executives in a sweeping investigation for wire fraud, data tampering, and targeted harassment across state lines. The tip? An anonymous flash drive, delivered to the Department of Justice by hand. No fingerprints, no trail, just proof, emails, transfers, surveillance contracts, directives targeting Elena, Leo, and several whistleblowers including Marie Hensley. By mid-morning, news vans lined the steps of federal court. Photos of Harold, stone-faced and cornered, flooded every outlet. The lion had been caged and he knew it. At Blackwood Tower, Arthur burst into Julian's office, breathless. It's live. Julian, already watching, didn't move. Arthur sat. Did you send it? Julian didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because a floor above, in her private study, Elena was staring at an empty flash drive case. The one Marie had given her. And beside it her handwritten letter. I told you I'd finish this. She had waited. She had collected. She had acted. Not out of vengeance, but clarity. Later that day, Elena walked into the Foundation's press room for a previously unannounced briefing. Reporters packed the space, murmuring with tension and caffeine. She stood alone at the podium. No Julian, no Ruth, no flanking security, just her. I didn't come here to claim victory, she began. I came here to name truth. Well, exams to avest professed. The room went silent, because for too long, fear has been the currency of power, and I am bankrupt of fear. She spoke of corruption not in theory, but in detail, of the systems built to favor the few, of how philanthropy had become camouflage for abuse, of how silence was bought, and sometimes sold, at the price of a child's safety. And she spoke of Leo. My brother didn't ask to be part of this war, she said. But they made him a battlefield. So I built a weapon, and that weapon was my voice. The applause didn't erupt, it swelled. Reporters rose from their chairs not out of etiquette, but gravity. Not one question was shouted. No mics thrust forward, only stillness. Afterward, Julian found her outside the building, seated on a bench near a fountain. Her heels off. Her shoulders relaxed for the first time in days. You dismantled an empire in 30 minutes, he said. No, she replied. I dismantled the myth. One. Julian handed her a small envelope. It arrived this morning. She opened it. A card. Inside, a child's drawing. A stick figure with long hair holding a microphone, standing beside another figure in a wheelchair. Crayoned words underneath. You make us brave. L. M. Age 9. Elena pressed the card to her chest. I want to visit more schools, she said. Perform in places where kids don't know they're allowed to be loud. Julian nodded. Let's start with Baltimore. Then Cleveland. It was 9. She smiled. Then Tulsa. Then her smile faded, just slightly. Harold's not done. No, Julian said. But he's wounded. And cowards limp loud. That night, the penthouse felt quieter, not empty. Just breathing. Elena stood at the window, watching the city exhale. Below, life kept moving, horns, buses, people unaware they were living in a story someone had fought to rewrite. Julian joined her, 2 glasses of wine in hand. To silence, he said, raising his. She clinked hers gently. To breaking it. They drank, and somewhere, beneath the hum of Manhattan, the world shifted. Elena was in the studio when it happened, not the penthouse music room, the real studio. Old wood floors, scuffed with time, walls lined with foam and hope. The kind of place that smelled like sweat and second chances. She had come alone, early, planning to record a rough vocal for a new piece she'd been writing in the quiet moments after the storm. A requiem, not for Harold or the past, but for the girl she once was. She was halfway through the second verse when Arthur called. She let it ring. Then Julian called. Then Ruth. She froze, stomach hollowing. Something had happened. She answered Julian. His voice was low, stripped of all armor. It's Leo. Her world fractured. Minutes blurred. Sirens in her chest. She didn't remember leaving the studio, only that Ruth had met her at the elevator with a coat and no words, and Arthur had a car waiting outside. They drove to Mount Sinai in silence. When she burst into the ER wing, a nurse recognized her instantly. Elena Vance Blackwood? She nodded. He's stable now. But it was close. A wave of nausea, relief slamming into fear. What happened? Elevated heart rate, irregular rhythm, a panic event, we think. He was found alone in the courtyard behind the dialysis wing. No staff nearby. Elena blinked. But he always has a nurse. Where was the nurse hesitated. He said someone told him you were hurt, that you'd collapsed again. And then, no one came for 20 minutes. Elena's heart stopped. She pushed into the hallway where Leo's room waited. He lay pale and wired, but conscious. His eyes lit up when he saw her. I thought you died, he whispered. She ran to him, holding his hand tightly. I'm here. I'm okay. You're okay. He blinked slowly. Don't let them lie to me again. She didn't ask who. She already knew. The next morning, Elena met Julian in the kitchen. She hadn't slept. Her voice was a whisper. They used him again. Julian nodded. We traced a nurse. New hire. Fake license. Disappeared. But Harold's name never appears directly. He's buried behind proxies. Elena's hands clenched. No more warnings. No more exposure. It's time. Julian studied her. Time for what? She looked up. To make sure he can never do this again. Later that day, Elena stood before the foundation board. Effective immediately, she said. I am restructuring the Elena Vance Initiative into an independent, privately governed trust. It will operate without oversight from this board, and its primary directive will be education and protection for individuals targeted by corporate retaliation. There was protest, pushback, but she came armed with numbers, donors, stories, and names. When she finished, no one objected again. Outside, she held a press conference. The city tuned in. I won't name him, she said. Not because he doesn't deserve it, but because this isn't about him anymore. It's about what we allow when we choose profit over people. That night, Elena stood by Leo's hospital bed again, watching him sleep. She sang not loud, not for show, just a few bars of Lacrimosa. He stirred, smiling faintly. You're not broken, he whispered. She leaned down and kissed his forehead. Neither are you. At 2:03 a.m., her phone buzzed. A single message, from an unknown number. You've made your move. Mine comes next. She stared at it for a long time, then deleted it, without fear, because cowards didn't get the final word anymore. 3 weeks later, the world had stopped spinning. Not entirely, but enough. Harold Thorne had resigned from his positions on 5 major boards. Thorne Global stock had dropped 14 points. Investigations swirled. The whispers became headlines, and the headlines turned into lawsuits. But Elena wasn't chasing any of it anymore. She stood on stage at Lincoln Center alone. No orchestra, no backup, just her. The gala was for survivors of what didn't matter: cancer, war, poverty, power. The room was full of people who had every reason to quit and didn't. Julian watched from the second row, his hand resting on Leo's shoulder. Elena stepped to the microphone. She didn't speak. She sang. Not opera this time. Something older, more personal. Amazing Grace. Soft, stripped down, no vibrato. Just a voice that had known what it meant to fall and what it cost to rise again. There were tears before the second verse, not just in the audience, but behind the curtains. Technicians, stagehands, volunteers, even Arthur, watching from the wings, let his jaw tighten as he wiped his eyes. When the final note faded, there was no applause, only breath, as if the room itself had exhaled for the first time in years. Then silence, then thunder. The applause rose like a wave, crashing through every corner of the theater. People stood, shouted, clapped until their palms stung. Julian remained seated, watching her with something close to awe. Elena bowed once, then walked off stage, straight into the arms of Leo. You did it, he whispered. She smiled. No, we did. Backstage, a courier waited with an envelope. No seal, no threat, just a check, made out to the Elena Vance Trust. Amount, $2 million. Memo. For the next girl who refuses to be quiet. There was no sender's name, just a postmark from Kansas. Elena folded the check into her bag. Outside, as they left the building, a small group of children waited with their parents holding handmade signs. You made me sing. I want to be brave like you. Music doesn't hurt me anymore. She knelt, signed a few programs, hugged a small boy who looked like he hadn't spoken in months. Then Leo said something that made her laugh. You realize, he whispered, if you ever try to go back to normal, people are going to riot. She smiled at him. There's no going back, she said. Only forward. Julian came up beside her, offering his hand not out of ceremony, but choice. They walked to the car not like mogul and trophy, not like savior and saved, but like two people who had dared to rewrite their names together. Before the door closed, Elena looked back once more at the children waving behind them, and for the first time, in the silence after the music, she didn't hear ghosts, only the echo of hope. The story of Elena Vance is a powerful reminder that true strength doesn't come from wealth, fame, or power, but from the courage to speak when silence is expected. It teaches us that even those written off, underestimated, or silenced, can rise to challenge injustice, not with vengeance, but with purpose. Her journey shows that the most lasting change often begins with one voice refusing to be quiet, and that voice can become a lifeline for others still waiting to be heard.